Okay, well, hopefully you get to do a little cuneiform. And it's actually kind of a fun little exercise. I like practicing it myself. And we're going to, do more work on ancient writing and more in cuneiform. And you'll be able, by the end to recognize some rudimentary characters. Um, there are certain inscriptions on bricks, foundation inscriptions uh, that are usually repeating the same kind of inscription from time to time. And you'll be able to recognize some of those characters. So if when you go to the Detroit Institute of Arts or another kind of museum like that, you'll probably be able to recognize some of these cuneiform characters. Okay, so we see these characters becoming more and more abstract over time in terms of their appearance. They're still pictographic, though. They still represent different things, although they can represent multiple ideas, archaeologists have determined, because of homonyms or homophones. That is, some of these phrases or some of these sounds like sag or goo can actually represent multiple meanings, right? So it's just like, our words like two and two. It could mean to go towards something, two, or it could mean the number two. The same thing exists in Sumerian, and they can tell from the context of some of the writing that the Sumerians were using a pictograph not to represent what the object that looks like, but to actually represent another word with the same sound. Okay, but still a pictographic script that's also ideographic. That is, once you can actually represent something else using that character, then you can also represent an idea. So it's ideographic and pictographic. All right, let's look at some of the other further developments. Again, here we have that on sound that represents, or symbol that represents divinity. We have barley. We're going to look at how it changes over time. We've got a person or a man, right? You can see how that changes over time, and Ninda over time. Okay, so in Mesopotamia, if you really had to sum it up, why did writing develop? Writing in Mesopotamia developed for administration purposes, specifically to record the amounts of different things. So we'd say really for economic recording purposes. It's accounting. That's essentially why they invented writing. For people probably associated with the temple who were just, bombarded with all sorts of information that they had to keep track of. Who's paying their taxes, which tributes coming in, do they have enough to pay these workers, that kind of thing. They created a counting system where they could record the amounts of different things, and then over time it became more elaborate so that they could record other things as well, and then grows even further past that so that you have a whole uh, wealth of different kinds of texts, as we're going to see. Right. And in other parts of the world, writing was developed for different reasons. So in Egypt, it does not look like writing was developed to record economic transactions, as we're going to see. Okay, so it's connected to the development of the state in Mesopotamia. It seems like it was an answer to a problem, and the problem was, how do we keep track of all this stuff? A problem of the elites, of the temple. How do we keep track of all this stuff? Here you can see this is another later Rook tablet. Again, numbers, you'll recognize that as the sheep sign, right? So the amount of sheep. The temple is obviously keeping track of lots of tribute coming into the temple. The temple and by the temple we mean not just the physical building. We're talking about the institution. So 85% of these archaic Uruk texts are economic in nature. Most are found in the Ayana precinct. Now, besides records of goods, what else do we have? We have some very important documents from the Uruk period. And they're lexical texts, which means that they're like glossaries. They're lists of words and lists of terms. Now, one of these is very important. It's called the Standard Professions List. It has lists and lists of different job titles, right? So the head foreman, the lower foreman, for example. And you can see all of the different signs. So, and there's different fragments of the Standard Professions List. So one particular fragment we see here, right, talking about kind of administrators, right? So the supreme judge, the mayor, the lord of cedar, the overseer, right? And then maybe the sage or kind of priest, chief, courtier, overseer of messengers, right? The reason why these standard profession lists are important is because they show that there's a hierarchy within the Uruk system, right? That is, you have different levels within all of these different sectors of Mesopotamian society. In the administrative sector, you've got a hierarchy. In the temple, you have a hierarchy. That is, you'll have someone who oversees all of these other people, and that person will oversee these people. Right? So it's a very important document in that respect. We also have lexical texts that give us the symbols for other kinds of things. For example, this one gives us a list of trees, wooden objects, geographical names, and types of spades. This one gives us a list of birds, animals, and objects, right, with the numbers showing tribute. This one contains a list of tree names and wooden objects. And this particular fragment, this particular tablet, shows the designations of different kinds of pigs or swine. Right? Now, these lexical texts were copied over and over, even after Sumerian, as we'll see, is not the official language anymore in Mesopotamia, right? But they continue to copy the old text down. And that was really fortunate for archaeologists because, for example, this is from, almost 2,000 years after those bulla were developed in Uruk. 1400 BC. This lexical tablet gives the Sumerian pronunciation of a sign, so kind of how it was pronounced, then the Sumerian sign itself, and then the Babylonian translation of that. So it's essentially like a dictionary. It's giving us the ancient Sumerian sign and then the Babylonian or Akkadian, it's same language, the Akkadian version of it. Now, archaeologists were able to decipher Akkadian. So when they found tablets like this, they then, and this was one of the first indications that there was an older civilization than Babylon early on in archaeology, because they had dug up these sites and they had found Akkadian tablets. And then they started to find tablets like this, which indicated that there was a language that was even older than Babylonian, an indication that there was a civilization that predated the Babylonians, the Sumerians. Right? So with these kinds of dictionaries, they were able to decipher Sumerian. Right? Okay, here you can see again some, the ninda, the symbol for bread, and, disbursement of rations. And in this one, even though they were beginning to transition the numbers, they're using two systems, which eventually become one cuneiform system of writing the numbers. So they completely drop the cones and the dots to write numbers and write numbers only in cuneiform by about 2500 BC. Right? Here you can see an early tablet from 2700 BC, and then a later tablet, and you can see how the cuneiform becomes smaller, more abstract, and the cones and dots are gone. Okay, so most texts that are found in Mesopotamia from all the time periods are economic. And there's some important ones we'll see that are not, that we're going to talk about in great detail. But most of the tablets are receipts, basically. It'd be like an archaeologist in the future finding me, the remains of me, and in my pocket there are crumpled up receipts from Meyer, right? And they say, oh, look at this. We've got the amount of things he bought, the price, and the date, and the location. That's essentially what a lot of these tablets are receipts. So 6 lambs, 1 goat kid from this person. He took charge during this month in the year. This is how they did years in Mesopotamia. They didn't have a numerical yearly calendar. They had months, but they didn't say, oh, this is year number 1500. They would say, this is the 6th year of so-and-so installed as the king, or so-and-so installed as the priest. So if we did this kind of writing system, we would say, first year of the reign of Joseph Biden or something like that to indicate 2021. So essentially, all this is saying is that the amount of goods, who's taking charge of it, and the time and the place. Then what we see, the next development in Mesopotamian cuneiform. Here you can see barley. As we said, barley becomes more abstract in terms of the way it's represented in cuneiform. So it doesn't really look like barley anymore. But by about 1000 or 700 BC, barley the sign no longer just represents barley. It represents the sound of the word barley, she, which then combined with other characters sound out a word, she erku, fig cake. Right? So in this context, barley has no meaning. Right? That is, the symbol for barley is just representing a sound, and the sounds put together spell out a word. And at this point, right, so this is about 700 BC. This is the type of writing that was used with the first found copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh. At this point, this is the Assyrian Empire. At this point, the writing is syllabic, not logographic or pictographic anymore. It is syllabic. Each sound represents, or each symbol represents a sound. So if English was syllabic, what would this say? Belief. Right? That's how we would write belief if we had a syllabic system. Well, how did the Mesopotamians think about the origins of writing? Well, they actually had a myth about the very beginnings of writing. This comes from a poem, Enmerkar and the Lord of Ararta. Because the messenger's mouth was heavy and he couldn't repeat the message, the Lord of Kulaba patted some clay and put words on it like a tablet. Until then, there had been no putting words on clay. Well, we know that's actually not how it started, but this is how the Mesopotamians conceived of it. Okay, we're going to see this sign in a lot of different contexts. So you'll probably remember it and you'll recognize it because it's pictographic and it looks like what it's supposed to represent. Right? You have a man and you've got this kind of rake or crown shaped thing. This is Gal and this is Lu. Lu is man, Gal is great man. Great man, we find out later, is kind of a synonym for king, or it's a term for a king, a great man. And great is used in other contexts to represent something important. Right? So here you can see that symbol, Lugal, which becomes more stylized over time until it becomes this. Okay, we talked about before how A means house. right? Well, gal, as I said, means great or big. So egal means big house, which actually means palace in ancient Sumerian. Yeah, Lu, man, Lugal, right? Man big means king. We said Eana. A is house, Ana is heaven, house of heaven, and Inanna, lady of heaven. So who could read and write? Who were the scribes? Right? There's some debate about this, but most people on the second question, most people are pretty confident in the idea that only the elites could become scribes. Why? Because you had so many characters to learn. You had to go to school for years to learn this writing system. This was something that was not picked up in a day. And again, this is sort of another comparison to the IT world. Right? Are you going to learn how to program in a few months? No. Right? It's going to take a few good years to be able to create your own software. It's the same thing with these scribes. They have to learn all of these different characters. Right? It reduces from 1,500 characters to several hundred, but still several hundred different characters. Now, could the average person read a few characters here or there? Probably. That's what some scholars believe. So that the average person in Mesopotamia, because they would, know some receipts, or they would, have to have receipts done occasionally. They would be able to recognize some characters, but they would not be able to read or write fluently. Only the scribes could do that, and because they had to go to school for a long time, they were usually elites. Now, what else do we know about schools? We actually have school tablets from ancient Mesopotamia. We know these are school tablets because they are actually found in rooms with all of these benches, and because they have the same character repeated over and over. And they're usually round. And these are practice tablets, essentially. You would come to school and you would take a piece of clay, roll it into a ball, then you'd flatten it into this kind of lentil shape. And then, the teacher would say, okay, today you're going to learn how to write this. And you would practice it on your tablet until you had it memorized, right? And you would be graded on, how well you remembered it, but also on your handwriting as well. In this particular tablet, they're writing the name of the deity Urash. And again, you see that symbol, that star symbol representing divinity, and then the name of the god, Urash. Okay, so we know from some of these texts, as we'll see later on, we actually have descriptions from cuneiform tablets of what it was like to be a student in school. Students had to go to a special school. They only had 6 days off a month. 3 of those were religious holidays. But these scribes were very, very important in ancient Mesopotamia, right? Because again, in order for the government to function, records have to be kept. In order for the government to function, you have to be able to have diplomatic contacts with other leaders and be able to write letters. And then there was a whole realm of other kinds of knowledge and information you would want to record as well. Right? Okay, so again, main incentive, bureaucracy, specifically of economic transactions. Once you have that, though, you'll have histories, mythology, poetry, proverbs, laws, medical texts, epics, decrees. This week, you're going to begin reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, and in translation, don't get scared. Not in the original cuneiform. I can't read that, trust me. But you'll get to see a little bit into the mind of ancient Mesopotamia by reading that epic poem. Okay, in what becomes the country of Iran, you have a group of people who are known as the Elamites, who are kind of contemporaries with the Sumerians, who were also developing a pictographic script with the same purpose as was happening in Mesopotamia. It was really just another part of Mesopotamia. And some scholars have decided to sort of crowdsource the work in deciphering some of this writing. That is, Now a lot of these tablets are digitized, photographed, and on the web, and people are kind of trying their hand at deciphering some of these tablets. A really good resource is called the CDLI. It stands for Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative. And if you go on the site, and I encourage you to check it out, it's got collections from all sorts of different websites and all sorts of different collections of cuneiform tablets of all sorts. Some are translated, some are not, and you can actually tell. You can look up by keywords and things like that. Okay, this is where we'll stop for this week. Next week we'll talk a little bit more about writing as we get into the next period of Mesopotamian development.